Hi, everybody. This is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. It's Wednesday, January 16th, and today I'm doing a special talk on the upcoming conjunction of Saturn in Capricorn to Pluto in Capricorn. Now, this is a transit that will not fully perfect until next year, but it's growing closer right now. The two planets are coming together more closely all the time. They're engaged with each other. There's an, you might call an application from Saturn to Pluto already in effect. And it is the largely like one of the most talked about and anticipated astrological transits in the astrology community right now. And if you're interested in astrology and you're someone who finds astrological forecasts and updates interesting, then you've probably heard someone talking about Saturn's upcoming conjunction to Pluto. The reason, very basically, that it's a big deal is because, well, two basic reasons. One is that they're both very slow moving planets, right? So it takes a couple hundred years plus for Pluto to go through the entire zodiac. It takes Saturn upwards of 30 years to go through the zodiac. So when they get together in a conjunction, it is a relatively rare configuration, as are the squares or oppositions. So anytime that you have a hard aspect from Saturn to Pluto, it's a rare event. So astrologers generally pay a lot of attention to the configurations of outer planets. They are often correlated with monumental or tremendously important historical periods. So because the outer planets, move very slowly, they're often associated with movements in the collective. That's the phrase that you'll sometimes hear, which is a way of saying that they transcend the individual. Though, of course, there is no reason that an outer planetary configuration cannot speak to the individual at a very deep level. One of the features of outer planetary transits that we pay attention to is their historical nature, the way that they seem to reflect or indicate or signify something about an important historical period. Okay, so we're going to talk at length today about Saturn's conjunction to Pluto and what that means, what you could expect from it. One of the main reasons that I'm focusing on it now, I'm sure I will talk about it at length in the future as well, because we're going to be thinking about this transit, and it's going to be something of a spiritual study for those of us who are interested in astrology for a long time. So this will not be the last time that we'll talk about it. This isn't the final word or anything that, and other astrologers will have a lot of good things to add. But the reason that I want to talk about it today is because the planetary moment that we're in right now, in this moment, this month, in eclipse season, is in a lot of ways, it's a sneak preview for it's a sneak preview for the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. We're getting a really good taste for what's coming through probably in about a year from now. So before I go into talking at length about just Saturn and Pluto, I want to try to kind of rein things in and bring things back to just what's happening right now, because that'll serve as a kind of, like I said, a kind of preview for a deeper talk about Saturn-Pluto. So what's happening right now? There's a couple of transits that are perfecting in the sky right now that all happening simultaneously in the next couple of days. And they all are a pretty good split between overall what I would say is a really hard Saturn vibe and a really expansive Jupiter vibe. Just to make it as simple as possible. Right now you have Saturn, Mercury, Pluto, the Sun, the South Node, all in Saturn's home sign of Capricorn. Meanwhile, you have Venus, Jupiter, and Neptune in Sagittarius and Pisces, all in a square with one another. Those are both Jupiter-ruled signs. So that is the bulk of the planets that we pay attention to. We're not talking about Mars and Uranus in Aries, and we're not talking about the moon. The moon changes pretty rapidly, right? So in terms of the slower moving planets outside of the moon, everything for the most part is congregated in a Jupiter or Saturn ruled sign right now. So you have a very strong tension, you could say, between the principle of growth and the principle of, people often use the word expansion, or the principle of liberal, broad qualities in Jupiter: good fortune, grandiosity, bigness, breadth of vision, and an upbeat, optimistic quality. And then you have Saturn. Saturn is more about that which is contractive and limiting, that which is about age and time. Saturn has more to do with delaying our gratification. Jupiter is more about enhancing our gratification, you could say. So there's a lot of juxtapositions like that, just kind of back and forth. Now, Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions historically are one of the best indicators of the beginning or the dawn of a new period. Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions are often historically associated with the beginning of a new, kind of like a, what do I want to say, like a new regime in government, a new platform in business or technology. It's where the old and the new come together, and there's a strengthening of tradition while also a broadening of vision. There's a respect between the old and the young. There's a mutual sort of encouraging that happens when the two come together by conjunction, which, by the way, we're not far away from, just a few years away from a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. So it's, of course, very interesting to see with Jupiter just one sign behind Saturn, that I think we're feeling that right now. We're feeling the desire for a new vision and a new foundation. And the hope is there, but there's this hanging feeling of heaviness that's also there. So the juxtaposition between these two planetary energies, just in terms of the distribution of the planets and the signs right now, and a load up of planets in Saturn sign and Jupiter signs. So you can just see that. Now, right now, specifically what's happening is the planet Venus in Sagittarius is moving into a trine with Mars in Aries. While at the same time, Mars in Aries is moving into a square with Saturn in Capricorn, and Mercury in Capricorn is moving into a conjunction with Pluto in Capricorn. That's all happening as a full moon lunar eclipse is forming. Yeah, that's a lot, right? There's a lot to that. It's a lot to unpack. So when I see something that's as intricate and elaborate as that, I try to break it down into the most simple components first. So again, it's a Saturn-Jupiter kind of dynamic. It's an expansion, contraction kind of dynamic. Oh, and I forgot to mention, as Venus is moving into the trine with Mars, Venus is also moving into the conjunction with Jupiter, and both Venus and Jupiter are square to Neptune. So that's that Jupiter component again. So you have a real pressure cooker going on with Mars, Saturn, right? And with Mercury, Pluto in a Saturn-ruled sign. But you also have this really kind of expansive and hopeful, optimistic, um, uh, kind of big dreaming quality to the Venus, Jupiter, and Neptune square. So, first of all, keeping it simple with Jupiter, Saturn. Next, looking at the aspects that are perfecting, the specific planets that are perfecting, and what do they each tell us? Okay, so Venus is square to Mars. Venus square to Mars, both in fire signs. What does that mean? Well, typically when you see Venus going into a trine with Mars, you're thinking to yourself, we're looking for some kind of agreement. We're looking for compromise. We're looking for allies. We're looking to make a deal where we are talking about some form of union, an agreement that's reached. Venus and Mars by a trine, which is of the nature of Jupiter, generally bring benefits and success, but they're going to bring them in a specific way based on the specifics of Mars and Venus's placements. So Venus and Mars are both in fire signs. Fire signs are hot and dry. It's the qualities that we understand to be related to fire in ancient astrology. So hot and dry. What happens when, something is in nature? Let's say it rains and the earth gets all, muddy or whatever, and then the heat turns up, it becomes really dry and really hot, like 85 degrees, super hot. That mud will concretize and it'll chunk up and break into hard separative forms. So fire is by its nature individualistic, or it's formed and it's shaped and it's distinct. That's the dryness. But it's also hot in the sense of in the sense of being able to exert force and to eliminate differences. Like when you think of what a fire does, for example, it eliminates complexity and reduces down to singularity. So a fire will spread and create and make more of itself by consuming things. So fire has a real passion and a real intensity and an outward kind of yang motion. It's individualized and particular. It dries, but it also consumes, and it reduces complexity down into singularity. So right now we're driving a hard bargain. It's a good way of thinking about it. There is a desire, and it's based in the will, it's based in the ego, it's based in the individual, and it's the desire to reduce complexities into something simple. And then you see Mars, who is squaring Saturn in Capricorn, cold, dry sign. Earth and fire both have the dryness in common. So again, you're thinking about containment, something crystallizing, something taking form, something taking shape, and the desire to make deals or look for solutions that have to do with the desire to simplify, reduce, or define, concretize, make formal, and eliminate that which feels superfluous. So it's a very willful Mars-Venus trine right now that if people have the same agendas and the same ambitions and the same concretely defined goals, there is the ability to build alliances and build allegiances and take concrete steps towards the realization of your goals. So that is all sort of there for the taking right now. And then when we see Mercury going to Pluto, when we see Mercury going to a conjunction with Pluto, you're also thinking about the Mercury as the interpreter, Mercury as the one who makes the deal, the messenger, Mercury as the one who decodes and explains. When Mercury gets into the mix, then we can see that there's, it's not going to be, it's going to take some doing. When you see Mercury so strongly indicated, it's like, okay, some craft, some ingenuity. Mercury was related with inventors traditionally, for example. It's going to take some craftiness and some ingenuity. And again, with Pluto, you're also thinking of power moves. So the need to express or communicate your bottom line and to sort of force the change. You can see this right now in the news if you look at what's happening with the government shutdown in the United States, or if you look at what's happening in the UK with the I'm not so up on the politics, but there was a big thing that happened yesterday with regard to the whole Brexit situation, and something about a vote of no confidence in the parliament, if I remember correctly, and the possibility that they'll be having to do something about their prime minister. I just saw a brief flash on this, so please don't. I'm very ignorant about the topic, but it was the same kind of deal, though, where there's kind of a zero tolerance right now, reaching the limit, coming to the end of something, feeling like you're done with something, but also working toward a compromise, working toward a solution, trying to find the best way forward while also feeling like you're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. So it's again, a Venus-Mars trine, really nice. It feels like you can make a deal, you can see some success, you can see some movement. But you're talking about a movement, in a sense, in a chess game that's moving very slowly, and that has a lot, it feels like it has a lot at stake. So another way of thinking about this is, I wrote something about this today in my daily horoscope that I wanted to read. Let me just make sure I've got this up. Yeah, so I was thinking about all of this morning, and here's what I did. When I see such a complicated lineup, like I said, I'll try to make it simple, and then I'll break down the most basic ingredients and try to interpret it from there. So again, just to reiterate, in this one, I saw the kind of, it's a pressure cooker with a Mars Saturn, a lot of fire, a lot of dryness, a lot of concretizing and willfulness too. And then this feeling of wanting to bring things together, wanting to get on the same page, but seeking a solution, seeking a compromise, seeking a resolution, but doing so in extraordinarily tense or pressured situations, and feeling like something has to be done. And there's sometimes there's so much willfulness and the feeling of so much at stake that the compromise may be harder to find than it initially appears, and there may be a lot of power moves being made. The Mercury Pluto conjunction. So here's what I did. I cast the I Ching. The I Ching is totally my it's my go-to. The I Ching is like, I consider the I Ching to be like walking into an ancient, cave where a Taoist master sits and says, here, let me tell you about what's happening right now. And you can ask them any question, and this amazing sage will give you insight as to the nature of the changes and patterns in the material world that are happening. In that sense, I consider Taoism personally to be like a rarefied understanding of the changes of material life. And when there's insight into those changes, commonly, you don't have to get so caught up and lost in them. At any rate, so this morning, thinking about all of this, I cast the I Ching, and the I Ching came back with 2 hexagrams that I'll explain in a moment. The thing I want to say before I go into this, though, is that the other thing that I asked the I Ching was, how does this moment also reflect the Saturn-Pluto conjunction that's coming? So it was kind of a double question. I said, I feel that this moment is a sort of preview for the Saturn-Pluto conjunction next year. So help me to understand the nature of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction and this moment that's unfolding before us as we see with the planets right now. So that was the kind of question that I approached the I Ching with. I wrote this: don't be fooled. Although Venus and Mars are getting together right now, with Mars engaging with Saturn, Mercury moving into a conjunction with Pluto, and Venus and Mars both in fire signs, the picture of harmony we're witnessing right now has more to do with trying to force a positive resolution or conclusion in the midst of a period of exhaustion, pressure, and high-stakes individual needs. Where does the sense of urgency come from? A lot of the times we mistake that for, I think we mistake that for Saturn. I think right now, one thing to be aware of is that the urgency may actually be coming from the Jupiter-Neptune square and the Venus-Neptune square. Jupiter-Neptune is also a slow-moving outer planetary transit, and that transit often brings up this intense longing for growth, for expansion, for change, for newness. Jupiter-Neptune transits are associated with, really expansive, enlivening, and inspiring science fiction and fantasy films, with advances in science and space travel, with cultural renaissance and things like that. It doesn't feel like that right now, in a sense. It's like if everything feels really heavy. But when there is such a feeling of the weight is amplified by the feeling of something has to change. We have to be free. We have to transcend the situation or the limitations. A lot of that is coming from this simultaneous feeling that we have that we're ready for something new. We're ready for the next step in our evolution, as we like to say. But we can't quite get there. So the I Ching was especially relevant this morning. So the 47th hexagram of the I Ching is often translated as exhaustion. This was the first one that came up this morning. And it basically depicts a dried up lake, or it depicts a time when resources have been dried up, or like that feeling that you get where you're running on empty. So the 47th hexagram of the I Ching has to do with the feeling of running on empty. You don't have anything left. In particular, in the 47th hexagram, when the sixth line is changing, it leads to a specific teaching that says, this is one of the translations: he is surrounded by tangling vines and besieged with weariness. He says to himself, if I would be regretful for doing nothing, or doing something, I might as well do something to take my chances of getting out of hardship. Let me read that one more time. He is surrounded by tangling vines and besieged with weariness. He says to himself, if I would be regretful for doing nothing or doing something, I might as well do something to take my chances of getting out of hardship. That's also the combination of the Jupiter-Neptune square speaking at the same time that there are so many heavy Saturn-Mars dynamics going on, or all of the heaviness lining up in the Saturn-ruled sign of Capricorn. There's this feeling of we might as well try something, or we might as well do something, or the feeling of needing to make a move or do something risky, or force a change through some kind of gamble. That feeling is there right now. And one of the other teachings about this line in particular that's very interesting is that this line also says that one feeling entangled by vines that are barely substantive. There's also a feeling, I wrote this, with Venus and Jupiter approaching the square to Neptune. You can feel especially desperate for relief, and almost you can feel as though the things that you're struggling with could be thrown off as easily as you could just, rip off your clothes. Like it feels as though I'm ready to just throw it all off. it actually feels like it's really easy and I should be able to just eliminate this very simply. And yet we keep coming back to this feeling of, oh, but it's not so simple. This should be eliminated. This should be gone. This is beyond the point of absurd. It should be very easy to shirk this off, right? Right. So there's also this teaching about this line in particular that has to do with a feeling that the things that you're tangled up in are maybe not even real, not even substantive. One should be able to eliminate such things very easily, right? That feeling is also a part of the teaching of this line of the I Ching. I wrote this, I said, when we can see the far shore, it's now within sight, but we need to call upon a deeper resource, a next level, or a deeper truth or honesty to help us finish the last lap. So it has this feeling of the finish line is in sight, the next thing is in sight, the freedom feels like it's already at hand. And yet it feels like there's things that are dogging us, or there's something still holding back, or still, some unfinished business. And it alternates sometimes between those feelings of like, I'm free, I'm in the next moment, I'm going forward now with something new. And then simultaneously it comes back to this feeling of, oh, this thing won't leave me alone. It won't, right? Like that. We all deal with this. These experiences, to some people listen to astrology, they say these things sound like cliches. They sound like things that everybody experiences. Well, yes, precisely. Astrology is really just a symbolic language that's always signifying the kinds of changes that we're all going through together psychologically as a collective, that we see unfolding, that really isn't much different from the way that waves move in and out in on the beach, or that storm clouds gather and burst. These movements in the psyche, these movements in the world, are indeed cliches. They are predictable and recycling all the time. And so it's helpful to recognize the pattern of feeling free, but feeling simultaneously like you have some unfinished business, of feeling like you are ready to go to the next step, or you've already taken the next step, but you keep getting pulled back into something. This is a challenging part of the dichotomy of what these planetary placements are saying right now. The other thing that's very clear about the 47th hexagram is that cutting corners won't work. We can do something to alleviate the pressure, but we have to recognize that anything that we do, if it's an attempt to cut the corner and to not sort of square up and face things, may create more stress and even more confinement. The way that I like to think about it is like if you've ever played with one of those toys as a kid. When I was a kid, they called them Chinese finger traps, and I don't know if that is for all I know, that could be a racist thing. I have no idea, but that was what they called them when I was a kid. And you put your fingers in these things, and if you pulled, they would trap your fingers, right? But if you relaxed your fingers and pushed in toward the center, you could gently release. Does anyone, I think you guys may know what I'm talking about, right? So similarly, this is one of those moments where you're in a situation, you're looking at it and you're going, this is simple. Like, my fingers are the size of the hole here. I should be able to just pull my fingers right out of this little device. But if you take what appears to be the really simple, really easy way, everything seems to tighten. Everything seems to cinch up, and it suddenly feels like you can't go where you want to go. On the other hand, if you kind of relax into the space of the pressure that you're feeling and the feeling of constraint, and you say, okay, I see that I still have some obligations, there's still some hardship, there's still some duty. I'm going to attend to that with a degree of surrender and acceptance. Suddenly, all of a sudden, it's as though these things that you thought were difficulties or worries or hardships start falling away, as if they really aren't that substantive at all. This is a weird space to be in right now, and I hope people are, I hope that, it's like, I run the risk of sounding like I'm totally out to lunch saying that like lots of people are going through this, but it's depicted in the planets. I recognize it in my own life, and I see it in the lives of my clients and my students right now. So the think about the surrendering right now and realizing that the big freedom, the big picture of freedom, if we lunge toward it and try to cut corners and push aside the weight or the feeling of necessity or the feeling of that which binds or constricts, the things that bind or constrict will seize us. They'll grip down harder. On the other hand, if you don't stress out too much about the things that are pressuring you right now and kind of ease up with them, just kind of allow for greater space and flexibility, you'll notice that they will probably, the pressure will be alleviated very naturally. Similarly, think about this in terms of negotiating with other people. Right now, you may have something that you want, and you may think, I just got to bottom line this and ram through, right? Because I see what I want. It's so close. So I should just shoot toward it. But if there's not a degree of humility, acceptance, surrender, compromise, openness to not getting what you want, the likelihood is that slamming forward right now will create conflict. The I Ching's second hexagram that came up after this line was number 6, which was conflict. So it's very, very important to recognize right now that the potential for creating more conflict than is really necessary is there because of the frustration and the eagerness to eliminate something that we don't want to have to be dealing with. So in negotiating or relating to people at work, in your relationships, your friendships, your family, whatever, it requires a delicate touch right now. There's something about making your needs and wishes clear, but doing so very carefully so that it doesn't come across in selfishness or disregard for the other person, so that it doesn't come off as demanding, so that it doesn't come off as a power play, and so that it doesn't come off as expectant. This will do one of two things. One, it will make the other person more inclined to come to you in honesty and in the same spirit with their needs, and compromise can be attained, and what appeared like it was such a hard thing can naturally dissolve very easily. On the other hand, it can create another positive outcome, and because not all conflict is bad. Some conflict is actually really healthy. When you go to someone in that spirit and you make your needs known or requests made, and you do so in a spirit of humility and openness to conversation, and the other person reacts, and then they take a position of uncompromising, unbending, they try to make a power play, all of that stuff. In the jujitsu of human relationships, you've won. The game over. Because when a person extends themselves like that and you've approached them, with the, what do they say, with the olive branch, and then a person will respond trying to bully, force, push, whatever. The reason that you win, even if there is some ensuing conflict you have to deal with, is because you've gotten clear. The great gift of having an encounter with another person, when you do it in the right spirit and then you get that response, is, okay, well, now I know where they stand. They're really about themselves, or they're really about their need, and they're expectant, they're demanding, whatever. And that helps you clarify your own position, your own worth, and it clarifies for you something that most of the time you are going to have to move forward and eliminate. So, for example, you may approach someone that you're working with, a client or a customer or something like that, and say, look, I'm going to need this, or I'm going to need that. I don't know how you feel about that. I really like to hear what you think. Um, I'm open to discussion about this, and but this is kind of where I'm at. And they respond and they're like, well, that's absolutely not going to work for me. I need this and blah blah blah. They just go nuts on you. It's like, well, do you want to work with that kind of person? Like they've just kind of exposed their cards. And a lot of the times that's the most clarifying thing we can get from an exchange like that is clarity about where we stand in relation to other people. That's the other benefit of this right now is that when people are forced into a corner and they're deluded into thinking that this corner is the realest and most intense thing in the world, they can't find any ease or freedom within this pressure cooker moment. They'll reveal their cards. They'll show you how they really feel. They'll show you who they really are. And that is clarifying, even if some ensuing conflict has to come. So, for example, the same thing is happening, right now in a weird way. There are people who are, seeking compromise and then getting into a position where, okay, no compromise, then the one who is going to become more demanding, more bullying, more that weakens their posture. I'd love to say that life is not some big competition, but the truth is that everything in the material world is consuming everything else all of the time. This is a world of competition. It's not pretty. We like to distance ourselves from it. But, a lot of the way that we live, the way that we eat, the way that we consume, a lot of it's based on competition, most of it. So the Tao in the I Ching, in this hexagram sequence, is also teaching us about the way of getting the things that you want or need when you have to work with competing forces or competing factors, especially when you're feeling dried up and at rock bottom or like your tank is running on empty. There are hidden reserves. One of the deep messages of exhaustion is that, remember that as a spirit soul, we are inexhaustible. Our actual source of consciousness is inexhaustible. And so we can find unlimited spaces of meaningfulness and health and happiness, even in times that appear to be really frustrating. And it often begins with curiosity, with choosing to see the limitation before us as something given to us, as literally as a gift or as an offering from the divine, and refusing to look a gift horse in the mouth, saying, okay, I'm going to accept what's in front of me. And when we do that, it's just spend a little time accepting the difficulty that's in front of us. Oftentimes the way out or the way through opens very unexpectedly. The intelligence that we need to move through a difficult time just appears. So that's also a teaching of the moment right now, is how those vines in the I Ching that are depicted as surrounding and entangling a person are also talked about as almost substanceless, almost without substance. It's almost as though they're not even real. So remember that. Okay, now that's the teaching about what's happening right now. I also said this today. I said, a simple test of what is essential. Does this action help to clear away an unnecessary necessity? Unnecessary necessities are those things we cling to out of a false sense of duty, obligation, or fear. But when we let it go, it often comes without conflict. Having something gone out of our life that is really not necessary can also lead to increased spiritual welfare. So think about those things that we cling to with a false sense of obligation. A lot of the times we imagine that it's out there, that the thing that is blocking us, but oftentimes it's a simple shift of perspective or attitude internally that can be very liberating. Simple things to think about. The other thing to remember is that, and now we're going to start talking about Saturn and Pluto. after things, the I Ching teaches us in exhaustion that after things have gone beyond the limit, they start to dry and die and wither up. So all growth is followed, in a sense, by decrease. All gain followed by decrease. All decrease followed by gain. So when something's gone beyond its limit, naturally the flow of material nature will start to cut back at it. Now, when cutting back is when we attend to the process of cutting back, limiting, pulling inward, and we do that with mindfulness, effectively what we're doing is we're shaping something, we're pruning something, or we're refining something. This process of consciously pulling back, of going with the pulling back rather than fighting against it, paradoxically has the ability to take us into radically transcendental places. Because when something starts falling back, on the literal level, you look, for example, at a plant, and let's say the plant starts withering and dying after having flowered and bloomed, and then it starts to wither and die. The realization of that process, when you see it as a whole, the plant takes on an entirely different form. When you can see a plant having gone through the entire cycle of life and death, and you perceive, you're aware of that cycle, and you follow it, suddenly you see the plant as a transcendental object. You see the plant as something that contains all stages of that cycle, complete in a space that is not material any longer. It reflects something of the material realm, but it becomes timeless, right? So similarly, one of the gifts of a time that's contractive, that's difficult, or whatever, is that even though something appears to be pulling back materially, it's in just those times that things are pulling back that we can remember that the true form extends beyond the blossoming, beyond the growth, and beyond the death. So it's a very good moment while you're feeling the desire to go big and grand and visionary, and I want to be free, and there's this imaginative impulse to throw off things that are binding. To remember that the contractive is also part when things start pulling back, it's not possible to grow. That contraction is the exact moment when we can also start to see the form, beyond the material form. We can start to see the blooming of the plant in all stages of its life in transcendental thought. So the gift of the cutting back, the limitation, the difficulty, is also a form of transcendental awareness. This is exactly what the I Ching teaches us, especially in hexagram 47, where although things appear depleted, dry, cutting back, dying, difficult, limited, delaying our gratification, right? Delaying our gratification, that if we learn to see the entirety of the Tao in its cycles, suddenly a transcendental form emerges in our perception, in our awareness. And it's really a life lived in contact with transcendental awareness that starts to give us the intelligence in every stage of the unfolding of the Tao about what we need to do to move in harmony with it, to participate with it. So we start to see ourselves and our lives as transcendental objects. It's a very important part of why we look at all of this in general. All right, so now I've got some things to share now about Saturn and Pluto. Now, all of this is, in a sense, a preview of Saturn-Pluto. Saturn and Pluto, this is from Cosmos and Psyche by Richard Tarnas. Really good book. There's a section that he has in his book, which is all about outer planetary cycles, called Cycles of Crisis and Contraction. While the Uranus-Pluto periods consistently coincided with widespread revolutionary upheaval, intensified emancipatory impulses, and radical cultural innovation, that's what we're just finishing, by the way, the successive quadrature alignments of the Saturn-Pluto cycle coincided with especially challenging historical periods marked by a pervasive quality of intense contraction. Eras of international crisis and conflict, empowerment of reactionary forces and totalitarian impulses, organized violence and oppression, all sometimes marked by lasting traumatic effects. An atmosphere of gravity and tension tended to accompany these 3 to 4 year periods, as did a widespread sense of epochal closure, the end of an era, the end of innocence, the destruction of an earlier mode of life that in retrospect may seem to have been marked by widespread indulgence, decadence, naivety, denial, and inflation. See, he's talking about the fact that when Saturn-Pluto comes, it's a contractive moment. It's cutting back where things had gone beyond the limit. It's very important to understand that we're participating in a time that in history, for example, where when great civilizations tend to go beyond the limits, they become excessively wealthy and powerful. Naturally, they start getting cut back. Darker, corruptive, or corrosive forces come in. That's in a sense what happens. An atmosphere of gravity and tension tended to accompany these 3 to 4 year periods, as did widespread sense of epochal closure, the end of an era, the end of innocence, the destruction of an earlier mode of life that in retrospect may have seemed to be marked by widespread indulgence, decadence, naivety, denial, and inflation. Both the First World War and Second World War began in precise coincidence with virtually exact hard aspect alignments of Saturn and Pluto. September 11th, 2001, was a Saturn and Pluto alignment, and he goes through many, many others. The Saturn archetype encompasses all that involves boundaries and limits. It defines and grounds, constricts and solidifies. It expresses itself in discipline and control, rigor and rigidity, repression and oppression. It rules judgment, guilt, the consequences of past actions, error and fault, defeat and failure, deflation and decline, depression and sorrow. Saturn is, in Nietzsche's phrase, the spirit of gravity, both heavy and dark. In Freud's terms, it is the reality principle, the delays and resistances to gratification. See, there it is, delayed gratification. The obstacles and diminishments presented by life's exigencies. Saturn is the conveyor of the hard truth, naked, unadorned, instructive, sobering, often painful. It is the bottom line, the workings of necessity, the inevitable and inescapable. In major aspects between two planets, of which one is Saturn, the corresponding phenomenon suggests that the Saturn archetype tends to combine itself with the second principle in such a way as to express its characteristic qualities and themes of contraction, realism, division, deprivation, materiality, hardship, judgment, strict authority, and so forth, but in this case through and by means of the archetypal principle associated with Pluto. So when you put Pluto in the mix with Saturn, you get profound depth, darkness, upheaval, upsurges from the collective unconscious or from the personal unconscious. So this is a time not only of contraction, of pulling back, of reining in, but also of doing so while there's a profound expulsion, purgation, or kind of a discharge of pent-up unconscious forces. So that's what's, in a sense, that's what's happening in the collective right now, right? Now, I want to read you something that I think is very, very important. This is the essence of the message that I have for us when we're thinking about Saturn, Pluto. And I think it's an especially important message to give as Jupiter is square to Neptune. And this is why I titled the talk Fear and Guardian Angels. So in an essay by James Hillman called The Legitimation of Fear, actually, let me just make sure that's, yeah, it's called The Legitimation of Fear. I'm going to read you a brief passage from his essay called "The Legitimation of Fear," which in many ways is an attempt to articulate the beauty that lies within such a moment. Because it's easy to hear all of that and to think to ourselves, "Oh God, we're screwed." But remember, we're students of the Tao, so to speak. We're learning to see the entire cycle from 20,000 feet. Even though we have to live through it and participate in it and do our best job of being an actor on the play, on the stage and the play of life, we still have to be able to see things from 20,000 feet, because it's that vision that allows us to move through these events with greater consciousness. Here's what he says in this essay, Legitimation of Fear. Allow me, in concluding, to take another track, to try for a quite different understanding by asking again, what is the importance of fear? And why is it lodged in the human soul to begin with? What is its soul status, its cosmic significance, its ultimate legitimation? My maxim now comes from a contemporary poet and novelist, Murmur Blakeslee, who has studied fear concretely very closely as a senior ski instructor of national and Olympic ski teams. Those individuals who hurtle themselves downhill to victory or devastating injury. She writes in conclusion to her study of fear at the brink that fear presses from our limitations the aged wine of humility as we face the implacable givens of the world. Fear is implanted in our hearts and sinews. Today we must say information in our genes. As a kind of knowledge, the knowledge of humility. In face of the implacable givens of the world, the aged wine of humility was the essential wisdom taught by both the Hebrew and Hellenic traditions. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, says Proverbs. Demonstrated as well as a principal message of classical Greek epics and tragedies, fear urges human humility that saves from human hubris. The relation with the implacable givens, the gods, was not love, but humility, staying within mortal bounds, drawing back, that primordial physical motion which initiates reflection, reflectere, to bend back. Let us say fear is primordial prudence, the wisdom of animal foresight at a cellular level. Shrinking of the perimeter equals staying within limits, and this primordial prudence is given with life, as are its implacable facts. The instinctive, wordless counsel of fear acts like a guardian angel. Jewish legend says, as there are angels of grace and angels of love, so too there are angels of fear and dread. Fear as an instructive angel has been elaborated by Kemp Smith in a sort of summation by this modern philosopher soon before his death. This angel seems to offer understanding of life in the world, or what I am calling fear's cosmic legitimacy. This understanding presents itself most clearly perhaps in Buddhism and its disciples of ritual gesture of the hands, or mudra, one of which most widely recognized is called fear not. Enacted because, as a Japanese practitioner explains, fear is innate, not only in man, but in everything which exists. The birds, animals of every sort, men, the sun, the moon, the worlds are continually in dread. It is this that one, the Buddhist, calls world filled with fear and dread. If fear is a potential given with the facts of the cosmos, then it is latently present anywhere, everywhere. Worlds are continually in dread. When you or I or any creature suddenly feels the presence of fear, we are placed in unmediated connection with the cosmos, engaged by the truth of reality, the truth that all things change, all things pass away, and the reliability of nothing can be assured. The keys to security lie less in calculated predictability than in the small omens of fear. For we are consumers of and consumed by the great conflagration of existence, Heraclitus's fire, riding the slow, imperceptible tremors of a quaking earth. Consequently, platforms of security, appeals to moral courage, repressive combativeness to hold fear at bay, shear our wits away from the actual protective angel who keeps us, in Kierkegaard's phrase, in fear and trembling, and in freedom. Freedom. How curious. We each know all too well that fear imprisons, paralyzes even the simplest movements, as when we vainly call for help in a nightmare. Yet that frozen instant presents the first freedom, awareness of that complete negation humans have named death, that we are bound to nothing whatsoever except death, the unknowable unknown. This negation, death, is the only necessity. There is no ontological obligation whatsoever but to die. The awareness, the recognition that one's ultimate obligation is negation by this universal implacable given, is exemplified by the death-defying hero and the suicide bomber, figures of radical extremity. In other words, we meet the fear of terrorism or catastrophe by understanding the psychology of freedom, the freedom tied to negation, bestowed by negation, and paradoxically freed from fear of negation. As Spinoza famously wrote, a free man thinks of death least of all things. And Kierkegaard proposed that one should live as if one were already dead. Angels are fantasies, winged voices, messages. They are most powerful and intelligent than a human being. They are more powerful, and intelligent than a human being. We may conceive angels as the configurations of imagination that accompany emotions, the images that fly into the mind during moments of fear. When Kierkegaard connects dread with revelation of human freedom, we may revision this connection as the freedom given by dread's angel, the winged messages of imagination. Really, really beautiful passage. And this is exactly what I was trying to intimate with the example of the plant. When the plant appears to die, you have the ability to just see the death and say, oh, that's a shame. It's not pretty anymore. It's not nice anymore. It's not growing anymore. And I really prefer the growth. But the transcendentalist, the spiritualist, has eyes to see that as soon as something starts cutting back, there's a recognition of mortality, of endings. And it's specifically that side of the recognition that often enables us to see the blossom of the full form of the plant, that encapsulates all of its movements and times, and that gives it transcendental meaning. So without the cutting back, the falling away, and the fear that accompanies it, we stand no chance to see the blossoming of things in the material world into spirit. So when we're moving into a Saturn-Pluto period, yes, it's contractive. Yes, there's upheaval. Yes, there's darkness. All of that, right? But if we keep looping into the story of good and evil and the heroic fight between good and evil, and that's all that we see, we will miss the transcendental image of the world and of divinity being presented to us in the midst of this time of fear and trembling. We'll miss it completely because we'll think, well, this contractive moment is a crisis that has to be dealt with heroically because I need to get back to the part of the cycle that involves riding a wave of joy and happiness and growth into the future. History repeats itself. Almost all ancient cultures believed that time was cyclical and endless. I want to read you now, to close, a chapter from the Bhagavad Gita. This is chapter 8 from the Gita, entitled Attaining the Supreme. Arjuna inquired, O my Lord, O Supreme Person, what is Brahman? What are fruitive activities? That's also karma. What is this material manifestation? What are the demigods? Kindly explain to me. How does this Lord of sacrifice live in the body, and in which part does he live, O Madhusudana? And how can those engaged in devotional service know you at the time of death? The Supreme Personality of Godhead replied, the indestructible, transcendental, living entity is called Brahman, and his eternal nature is called the Self. An action pertaining to the development of these material bodies is called karma, or fruitive activities. The physical nature is known to be endlessly mutable. The universe is the cosmic form of the Supreme Lord, and I am that Lord represented as the Supersoul dwelling in the heart of every embodied being. Anyone who quits his body at the end of life, remembering me, attains immediately to my nature, and there is no doubt of this. In whatever condition one quits his present body, in his next life he will attain to that state of being without fail. Therefore, Arjuna, you should always think of me, and at the same time, you should continue your prescribed duty and fight. Arjuna is a warrior. With your mind and activities always fixed on me and everything engaged in me, you will attain to me without a doubt. By practicing this remembering, without being deviated, thinking ever of the Supreme Godhead, one is sure to achieve the planet of the divine, the Supreme Personality, O son of Kunti. Think of the Supreme Person as one who knows everything, who is the oldest, who is the controller, who is smaller than the smallest, the maintainer of everything beyond any material conception, inconceivable, and always a person. He is luminous like the sun, beyond this material nature, transcendental. One who at the time of death fixes his life air between the eyebrows and in full devotion engages himself in remembering the Supreme Lord will certainly attain to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Learned persons and great sages in the renounced order enter into Brahman. Desiring such perfection of life, one practices celibacy, which process I shall now explain to you as the means for attaining salvation. The yogic situation is that of detachment from all sensual engagements. He describes many types of yogas, and this is one type that he's describing. Closing all the doors of the senses and fixing the mind on the heart and the air of life on the top of the head, one establishes this situation. After being situated in this yoga practice and vibrating the sacred syllable Om, the supreme combination of letters, if one thinks of the Lord and thus quits his body, he will certainly reach the spiritual planet. For anyone who is without deviation in remembering me, I am easy to obtain, O son of Pritha, because of his constant engagement in devotional service. The great Mahatmas, yogis in devotion, after achieving me, never come back to this temporary world, so full of miseries, because they attain to the highest perfection. From the highest planet in the material world down to the lowest, all are places of misery, wherein repeated birth and death take place. But one who attains to my abode, O son of Kunti, never takes birth again. By human calculation, 1,000 ages taken together is the duration of Brahma's one day, and such also is the duration of his night. In the day of Brahma, all living entities come into being, and when the night falls, all is annihilated. Again and again the day comes, and this host of beings is active, and again the night falls, O Partha, and this host is helplessly dissolved. There is another eternal nature, which is transcendental to this manifested and non-manifested matter. It is supreme and is never annihilated. When all this world is annihilated, that part remains as it is. That supreme status is called unmanifested and infallible, and is the highest destination. Going, no one ever returns from that, my supreme abode. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, than whom no one is greater, is attainable by unalloyed devotion and love, O Arjuna. Although they're in his abode, still he is all-pervading, and everything is fixed within him. He goes on to describe some more things about the yogic process of death. But that chapter reflects not unanimously the way that all ancient traditions felt or saw things, but is very close to the way that so many different traditions viewed time and the nature of the soul and the nature of reality, including Platonists, Stoics, the Hermeticists, all of which were considered foundational philosophies to the dawn of Western astrology and Eastern astrology. So the Saturn-Pluto moment, I think hopefully what I hope has come through during this talk has been that there is incredible expansiveness and freedom, transcendental awareness that grows during times of great contraction. It doesn't come, though, unless we surrender into the contractive space and accept it as just as necessary as everything else, just as beautiful as everything else. We have to learn to see the contraction, the fear, the worry, the anxiety, the feeling of limitation. Those are instinctual awarenesses that we have of eternity. If we can learn to see those feelings and this contractive space as a message from the divine, as angelic in nature. So this is what I have for you guys today. I hope that this was interesting. These are, of course, my own, insights and realizations about after thinking about these things for a while. Obviously, there's going to be more to say in the next year as this conjunction between Saturn and Pluto comes closer and closer. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening. And I hope that you have a very beautiful rest of your week. And we'll be back in touch soon to talk about the upcoming lunar eclipse, which is like the cherry on top right now. So we'll see you all soon. Take care.